All right, so today we're going to pick up where we kind of left off, but then learning more stuff. Last time we went through After Effects, how After Effects works with tracking. The purpose of that one is so you can see this is how After Effects tracks. That's not part of the assignment. That's just getting you used to tracking, seeing what's a good track. Still do it. If you haven't done it, you still want to do that. The next stage, we're going to do it in Nuke so you can see how Nuke's tracking system works. This is typically in my opinion, a better tracking system because we have a lot more control of it. But there's a couple more steps in order to use it because it's Nuke, of course. So the first thing we do is we bring in our footage into After Effects the same way we brought in our other footage. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to import and find the footage. You should be using, for this one, this 006 2K. I think that's the one 006, yes. 006 2K. And the reason for that is just because of the simplistic movements that she does in this are really well for what we're going to be doing, okay? We drop this onto a new composition, and then here is the piece of footage. Okay, let's preview it. So just like the other one I showed, she has a VR headset on. She stares into space for a while, and then she starts clicking stuff. Super slow. All right, so we have to watch the whole thing because eventually we'll see it. Okay, now one thing to note on this before we take it into Nuke are the frame numbers that I have here. If I didn't have the frame numbers, I would have a timestamp, and the timestamp would look like this. It starts off around 22 seconds and it goes to however far. Whenever you edit a video like in Premiere or whatever and you cut that video out and you send it out to another software, it remembers that time code. So it remembers exactly where it was cropped to. So that's what it's doing. So when we take this into Nuke, it's actually going to start off with frame 8056 as my frame number 1. I don't want to do that. I'd like to start off at 0 and then bring it in. If this was something that is part of a movie, yes, we would keep it at 8056, but it's not part of a movie, just part of our class stuff. So I'm going to go to my comp settings. I'm going to reset my start frame to 0, and now it starts at 0. Now you can bring in, into Nuke, you can bring in actual movies. Sometimes it will crash Nuke though, so it's not recommended to do that. All right, Nuke is a pretty stable program until you push it. So what we're going to do is we're going to export this out as a sequence. So I'm going to go to Export, Add to Render Queue. Under Lossless, I'm going to send it out as a TIFF sequence, and that should be it. Okay. Before we go on to the next part, there are other formats that are in here, such as JPEG, such as Ping, Photoshop, Targa. Any reason why I picked TIFF over all the other ones? Any ideas? Well, that works the best. Yep. Yeah, they're high quality images. They're pretty universal, and we don't lose any quality when we go from program to program. If I save this as a JPEG, every time I were to save it, bring it into Nuke, and then save that and bring it back into After Effects, I would lose quality every single time. Okay. Smaller files, but they lose quality. So I'm going to save it as a TIFF. I'm going to go to here, and then I'm going to put it inside my tracking folder. So inside of image sequence, I'm going to make a new folder, full res hologram. And I'm just going to call this full res holo. I put a dot there. I put the brackets come with it, # brackets .tiff. If you remember when we did the game station and we exported it out of Nuke and brought it into After Effects, we saved it as name.###.tiff. It's doing the same thing. After Effects uses the brackets in order to figure out how to get where to put the numbers at. Okay, so this will name every single frame 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to I think it's 300 and some. You can do save in subfolder. I've just already made the subfolder, so I don't need to do that. So I hit save, and then I hit render. And then it goes. Now, I don't need to do this. I don't know why I'm even doing it. I already have this. I'm just taking up disk space, apparently. All right. So I'm going to come into Nuke. I'm not going to make this full screen because you guys can't see the left side of it, and it'll be until halfway through the lecture where you actually tell me you can't see the left side. There we go. So I'm going to hit S for my settings. I'm going to go to my project directory. Tracking, yes. I'm going to File, Save As, and call this tracking 01 to whatever one I'm on. There we go. All right. I'm also going to make sure I set my format size. I've already done it because I've already brought the footage into this file. But you'll see when I go and read this file in here, full res, girl tracking interface. There she is. And I hit 1, and I bring my viewer all the way over here because it's all the way there. Once I do that, this option, if it wasn't already listed, will be listed there, okay? And I can verify it by whatever size this is. So this format as it came in was 2K 2048 by 1080. So when I come down here, my full-size format should be 2K 2048 by 1080. That way everything I create is based off of those numbers. So cool, I'm going to leave that. The frames per second don't matter too much because of how we are... we have a sequence, we're exporting the sequence, bringing it back into After Effects, and then that will be where we create the movie. So I don't need to worry about that. My frame range, I'm also locking into what this is, 0 to 364. So I just make sure that my frame range is 0 to 364, and that's locked. Everything else should be good. I'm going to close this. And then I'm going to show you something before we actually get into the tracking part of this. So this is one of the cool things about working inside of Nuke with footage like this. If I hit the play button, you can see how slow this is going. It's basically playing back at about 2 frames per second. If I hit Control P, this will lower the resolution, so now it's 1024 by 550. And when I hit play, it'll play back at, well, it's playing this back at about 2 also. Probably because I'm recording, but typically it'll go faster. Control P is proxy mode. It's basically shrinking your footage down so it can play back faster. So if you had a bunch of footage, this is typically a good thing to have. So in my case, because I'm recording, it's not affecting it either way. So I will just leave it off for now. All right, so the way the tracker works inside of Nuke is, of course, there's a node that's called tracker. So I just add this to the grouping. Now, it looks pretty simple, but we also get not only this window, but we get this whole bar of things here. And we also get a hotkeys that we can use to do our tracking. So like in After Effects, we had to basically hit the button and then like hope for the best and then check it and then undo stuff and redo it and move things around. This one you'll see is much nicer. So one of the things I recommend you do, open up the video, let's say in QuickTime or in After Effects, not QuickTime, and go through and see where things are happening. This is going to play back a bit quicker just because of how After Effects works with the actual video. And if you write down where the major frame movements are, where the major hand movements are, so this is like frame 71 to I think 84. Yeah, about 84. That's like her first hand movement. So it's very easy if you just write these things down. 71 to 84, there's a movement. And then the next movement happens pretty shortly after this. There it is. So it's at like 120 to 130. Okay.
I think you can mark these frames too, can you?
You can here, but I would say write them out so when you go into Nuke, you just have like a piece of paper list. Yeah, you can hit the asterisk key, and that will mark it if you want to do it that way. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my tracker. I'm going to go to frame 71-ish. There it is. And I'm going to zoom in on her hand. Now to add trackers, I just hit add track. Now Nuke is smart enough to know, okay, you've zoomed in on this area, you hit add track, it pops it pretty much right in the center. A couple things also happened. You'll see we get the same exact tracker we had in After Effects, right? That looks exactly the same. The smaller inner circle, the bigger outer circle. This one does not rely on that middle point, so I can move the middle point and it doesn't screw stuff up. As I scale this up and down, you'll see that it scales both up and down, okay? You'll also see this. this is what frame I'm currently at. So as I move this around, this is kind of like a magnifying tool. So if I'm zoomed way back here, I can still see exactly what I'm looking at. After Effects does not have that fun feature. The other thing that it has is this. This is a keyframe. So as I track something, let's say I'm tracking the very tip of her finger, or let's say the back of her finger where the nail bed is. So as she moves her hand across, if I see that tracker gradually slipping away from that nail bed, I can see it in the magnifier and I can verify it with my keyframe. It'll say, your keyframe was here, now it's down there, probably not working. And then I can adjust it and After Effects or Nuke will save all that information. So I'm going to put the tracking point here. We don't need to worry about any of the other stuff over on that side yet. And then I'm going to say track. Now there's a bunch of buttons here, very similar to After Effects, some of them, but other ones are very different. So the stop button is stop, it just stops the track. This is track next, so go forward one frame. After Effects did have that one, but notice the hotkey C is for tracking forward a frame, and then X is for tracking back. If you look at the keyboard, they're right next to each other, so it's easy to remember. The next one is track forward straight up. So it'll just literally just track forward to the end of time if we want it to, or until it crashes. Or not crashes, but just stops. We also have track range. So this is one that After Effects doesn't have. I can say track between this frame and that frame, and it'll track between these frames. So that's a nice feature because if I know the exact frame range, 71 to 84, I can say track from 71 to 84, and hopefully it'll do a good job. I know in this piece of footage, her hand and the background are very similar in tone in the software, so I really need to kind of adjust my settings so that I get a good solution. Also, her hand moves very quickly in some frames, so there's a lot of motion blur, it loses it. So I'm going to go frame by frame for the first one, and then we'll see how the other ones do. So I'm going to hit C, and then watch it. Okay? So what I'm not doing is watching the major screen, I'm watching that little magnifying window. If I made a boo-boo, I hit the back button with the arrow key, and I can see where I've kind of lost my track. Here it's at the fingertips. Oops. Or there it's in the middle, here it's kind of blurry, and it looks like it's probably at the fingertips. I'm going to pull this down some, there we go. Hit C again. Okay. I'm doing C every time because I'm going one frame at a time. Okay. Now on the next key, it actually jumped out of the box. The frame between this hand and the next hand position was outside of my box. So I made the box bigger, so maybe it'll pick it up. It does not. And this is just one of the issues you have with tracking, is it just doesn't always pick the stuff you want it to pick. There we go. So I made that box bigger, made the thing smaller, and I'm hitting C again. Okay, and again it lost it, so I'll hit the back button. Oops. Click on that, maybe adjust it some. Yep, there it goes. Now we can also see the path here, and what's nice about that is I can actually see how this is moving. If her hand is moving in a nice smooth arch, I should have a nice smooth rounded pathway as she's like swiping her hand down. This also moved off. It looks like it's on like the middle of her finger now, so I'm just going to drag this over here. I'm going to go back a frame, just make sure maybe it's a little bit there. It's better. And then hit C again. It's good. All right, somehow it picked the middle of her hand. Whoops. There we go. There we go. And one more frame. 84. Yeah, so that first swipe is not really a good one because of how much motion blur it has on it and how big of a move. Okay, so that's good. Now notice in this how many different times. Every time I moved that thing and did a manual keyframe, it set it right here. That way I can go back and compare what is the frame at. In this one we have a lot of leniency. If this is a VR set, number one, we wouldn't be able to see it because she sees it, we don't. But number two, as someone grabs something in midair and just kind of moves it like that, it doesn't have to be perfect, okay? It's technology. So as long as it looks like she's grabbing it, moving it, we have, it works, okay? So that works. As I go back and forth, you can see how I can see all the stuff there. If I want to get rid of these things, I can go to my settings, I can go to keyframe tracking, and I could turn these things to 50 to make them smaller. I can turn them off too, I just don't like to. And same thing here, I can make that one smaller. So now if we look at this, you'll see, there goes our hand. Perfect. All right. So now let's get this data out of there. So down here at the bottom, there's a bunch of different ways that we can get the data out of this node. Right now, I'm going to go to transform match move right here at the bottom. Not the very bottom. There's two of them down there. One says match move baked. The other one says match move without the bake. So I'm going to hit the regular one and then create. We'll notice that we get this node. It has an arrow attached here that we would pipe something into it. And then we have this green arrow. Anytime you see green arrows, there's a connection. There's some sort of connection from one node to another node. And what it's currently connecting is this information. So here's the translate information from that. Here's the center. Here's the scale. Here's the rotate, and so on. I'm going to add a checkerboard. This is just a whatever image, okay? It's the right size, 2048 by 1080. I connect it, and then I'm just going to merge these two things together. This is on top, this is on the bottom. And close everything so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. All right, so the checkerboard is right on top of the other piece of footage. As I go forward, the checkerboard is moving. Now, it's huge. It hasn't been sized down yet, just like we had to do the other one. So I'm going to go to this. My scale is locked. I'm just going to right-click and say no animation, yes, and no animation, yes. Set this back to 1. That way I have one slider to grab both of these. Because on the scale, there's no animation. In this, we're just dealing with translates, so it's just moving the position of it. If we had something that started off further away from the camera, then got bigger, then we would have scale, okay? There we go. So now we have our little animation here. So it's kind of floating above her head. Close that. And she grabs it and pushes it down. I'm also going to set up my work area in Nuke. If I go here to in and out, and then I grab this and click and drag these over, that's my in and out points. So if I just want to focus on an area, I can just kind of drop those in. There we go. Okay, so you see it's not perfect, I'm sure. I mean, there's probably some area where it doesn't look exact, but it looks good enough for what we're doing. Now, one thing I do want to add to this is I want to have some sort of 3D to this, okay? Nuke has its own 3D environment. It doesn't have like After Effects where you can just kind of like rotate this thing by clicking one button. I actually have to create a separate node called a 3D card, and that's what will allow me to do that. Whoops. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to add a card 3D. And I have to be careful where I add this. If I add it after the match move, basically the item is moving, but it's also rotating. So it's basically rotating from this random spot while it's moving too, so that can adjust where it's moving. So I need to actually add the card above it. Now it has a bunch of arrows, we just need the one. So it'll automatically figure out which one inside there. Then I can go into rotate and say, I don't know, 30 degrees I think I used, or negative 30. There we go. Now it does a weird thing where you get this huge perspective on this. There's like a lot of perspective on there. And it's because on this transform, where I scaled it, it's like rotating it and then doing this weird scale. So I'm going to set this back to 1 and then actually do my scaling on the card itself here. Oops. There we go. And then I have to move it up because it moves it like out of the frame. There we go. And then I can check it out and see how that looks. All right, so maybe a little bit of rotation. You can also hold control and it'll bring up the rotate manipulators. There we go. Perfect. Okay, and that's something that can be animated. if she grabs it up here and slides it down, I could have it rotated like this, and then as it slides down, it rotates the other way too. It's just a matter of right-clicking on this, setting a key, going up further, and then rotating it where I want that thing to be. Okay, so I'm going to do that real quick because I think it looks kind of silly the way it is with it kind of facing two different directions. Set a key, go to the end, which is 84. Maybe just set it the other way. Oops. I'm going to go back to this. I think I want to set keyframes on all three of these. Whoa, don't go crazy. There we go. Cool. And Nuke is auto key, so I don't need to set another key. Just set it once and it's good. There we go. Okay, and you really want to treat each one of these as their own thing. So before I move on to the next one, make sure this one is good. And that looks pretty good. I could tweak it further, but I think it's good enough for what we're doing. You may notice this, Nuke was kind of stuttering as it was moving. Every time you change your frame, so I just adjusted where this was at. I'm going to hit play again. Let me zoom in actually and then hit play. So every time I do this, Nuke is recalculating what is in the view and rendering just that. And what that does, it allows Nuke to render stuff back quicker because we're only seeing this portion of it. It's not rendering all the other stuff that's outside. So when I zoom out and I move this back up and I hit play again, you'll see it stutter because it's loading in basically like a half a frame that it already has plus the new frame. And then once this line is orange, you're good. It's playing it back in real time. Okay, so that feels like it's there. It feels like she's actually grabbing it and moving it. Some other things we may want to consider. If this is an actual hologram, is she grabbing it up here and then like sliding it down in this arch, right? Or is she grabbing it here and sliding it straight down, right? It would make more sense to go straight down unless it's like a 360. So that might be something we want to adjust. Not having it move in the X direction, just having it move in just the Y direction, okay? This shot is pretty good because we don't have a whole lot of wrapping around, so it does work. So if I go to this batch move here and I right click and I say no animation on the X and say yes, what this will do is it'll not animate in the X direction, just the Y. There we go. So now she just slides it straight down. Okay. Again, another benefit of Nuke is that it's very easy just to add stuff, take stuff away inside here. Okay, so I'm happy with the way that one looks. I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm going to reset this to global. I'm going to turn off my work area stuff. And then I'll go to my next one, which is I think over here at 120-ish. There we go. Okay. As I do my tracking, I don't want to see all this other stuff. I want to get back to just the tracker. So you'll constantly be jumping back to the track, doing a track, and going there. Once you're more comfortable with how this flow is going, you can literally do track, 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 and then do all your other stuff at one time, kind of like in that kind of order. So now I'm going to go back to my tracker. I'm going to add a new track. Whichever one of these are turned on, that's the one that Nuke is going to be using. So we don't want both of these on because number one is good. I'm going to turn that one off. You can use a different tracker for each one of these things if you want. It's just more work. Nuke allows you to put everything under one node, okay? So I'm going to go to track 2 now. There's track 1. I'm going to put it right here by her fingertips. Make this a little bit bigger. Let's look at some of the other options that we have. So in After Effects, there was basically 2 options that we were able to play with. Inside this setting, here's a bunch of options that we can play with. Anytime we're doing this kind of thing and it's going from one frame to the next frame and trying to figure out where that is, a lot of things go into play. One of them is, what is it tracking? Is it tracking the red, green, and blue channels, or is it just tracking the red or the green or the blue? So if I hit R, G, and B, you can see that the red channel, with that background, that the hand actually stands out really well from the background. On the G channel, the hand itself is pretty contrasted, and then the blue channel is a pretty good one too. So I may track just with blue by turning these two off, okay? Now I've tracked this piece of footage with just blue, just green, just red. It's very minimal of how much it helps, okay? In some instances, it'll help tremendously. In this case, it's very negligible. So I'm just gonna leave those on R, G, and B. I can also say adjust for luminance changes. If we had something like her hand that was in shade and then it goes into the sun, that's a luminance change. Or maybe we have an item like this where the light just kind of catches it and we see more of a reflection. That's a luminance change. So typically you want that to be on. Maximum iterations is how many times it's checking to make sure that that track is right. So if you constantly get bad feedback, like it's still not working, you may want to put this up to, not 2,000, like 200 maybe, okay? For this track, it's actually really easy because her hand is pretty distinct. As long as you move that thing into the next spot, you should be good. And then there's other stuff that we'll get into further down the lane. Way over here, this is where we could tell it to re-grab a new image on every frame, on the first frame, on every nth frame. Again, typically on this, if errors above is fine, okay? So we're going to leave it the way it is, back to the tracker, and then we'll go forward and track again. So I'm going to hit the track button. Let me make that magnification bigger again. So 100 pixels. There we go. All right, so watch as I go. I'm going to put this way over here. I can't even see where that is. And watch this window when I hit the play button. Okay, that's one of the things that After Effects, again, didn't have. It didn't show us that track as it was going. So the second it gets off frame, I can cancel it, fix it, and then go back to it, okay? So we'll come back, we'll figure out where it went off frame. So that's pretty good there. And actually it goes right to the end of where I need it. So she just like swipes her hand right there, and that's all I need, okay? So I'm going to go and delete everything forward. That's what this one says. Clear everything in front of this keyframe. And now it's gone. Okay, so that works. Good. Now, watch what happens here. I'm going to go back to my merge and take a look at this. And close that. And we'll see if this is still working. Okay, so that still works there. I'm going to go back to my tracker, go back to this. Notice on the tracker, for whatever reason, track 1 jumped back on. There's a T at the end of this, okay? Sometimes this T will come off and it'll be on the track that you were just tracking. This is what information is getting sent out of the tracker. So if I click that back on, notice now that that top one doesn't work anymore. Now it's going to be moving with this, okay? So like in After Effects, whenever you track something, you sent it over to something else, it's basically just copying that information. When I did this down here, when I just did the transform match move, it's linked those two pieces. So anytime I make a change to the tracker here and I choose a different button there, it's going to update that other information, okay? So I'm going to leave this back at 1. And instead of this being a transform match move, I'm going to do a baked. Okay, so this is number 1, I'm re-exporting out. This one doesn't have anything else to it. It's just the tracker itself. It does have an A for animation. It doesn't have a green line. I'm going to delete this one, drop this one in. So that's number 1 back in place. No connections to the rest of it. Now I'm going to get one for number 2. Turn that off, turn this on, bake one for that. There we go. All right. Now, as I start putting these in here, I believe there's 8 or 9 that we have to do. Every single one of them gets their own merge. Here's this track, that's merged in. Here's this one, that's merged in. Here's this one, that's merged in. So we need to keep organized right away so that we don't have issues, right? So we can keep this like this. This is definitely a way to do this. So here's my original footage. Here's my tracker, and then every time I do one of these match moves, it'll just fall in line for each one, okay? And so my next match move will just go here, and I'm just going to steal this stuff because I just use a placeholder for it. and then I add another merge. Because that's what gives it the information of how to move each one of those. If it doesn't have that, then it won't move at all. And then we can preview this. Scoot that over. Go. Okay, oops. All right, so there's that one coming down. Now I don't see this other one wiping across. I think this card 3D is probably different settings than the other one. All right, so I'm just going to delete that 3D card. I'm going to rewind this again. It should have been right there. Where are you? Let's go back to our tracker, number 2, baked. Let's delete that. There he is. And it moves across, yes, that's right. Oh, my A and B are switched, that's why. Huh. There you go. B has to go this way because that's the background of the rest of them. All right, so now, if I copy this card again, let's just paste it and see. All right. So it's in the wrong spot. It has animation on it. So this card will not work for a second one. So let me just make a new card 3D and drop it in and do all the same stuff. So scale it down. It allows us to adjust the position and rotate it. The animation comes from this. That's all the animation. This allows us to make sure that it's kind of rotated into that same perspective that we should see the rest of these at. Negative 30, negative 60, I think would be a better one. 50. There we go. There we go. All right, now again, I can look at this and kind of block this in. So I'm going to go to my in and outs first. I need to set this up. If I just hit in and out, it would automatically jump to this. I wouldn't be able to set it, so now I'll go to in and out. And then preview it. So this should be our first step, okay? So today, before next class, whenever, go through and do tracking. Don't worry about what you're putting in there yet. Just get a random piece. That's why I use a checkerboard. It's easy to see. Is it moving right? Does the perspective look good? Does it match what I'm doing? I don't like the little hit right at the end, how it like kind of bounces back. That's kind of weird.
Looks like usually with those bounces like that, you see that when you're working with interactive stuff.
Right. Sometimes I don't like it though. This is a nice smooth interface. What was that? No, you can use whatever. You can just use a solid color. I don't care. So I'm going to go to the match move. I'm going to go to the dope sheet, and I'm going to zoom in. If you've had animation class, After Effects, 3D, whatever, same thing. Here's all the keyframes. I'm just going to grab the ones I don't want and delete them. That's all I need. That's where my ticker was. That line says this is where I'm happy with. Everything else gets deleted. And so now I should not have that little bounce that's in there. Now, if this was a linked item, I would have to go back to the tracker and then do that. This is why it's good to have it as a separate piece. There we go. So that feels good. Now, other stuff that I could add to this too, like I may want this to, let's say instead of it just stopping there or bouncing, let's say that I want it to continue a little bit further, okay? So I can go to, let's say it stops at 128. Let's say I went to 134. I opened up my transform, and I just adjusted this. Whenever you're working with numbers inside of Nuke, I'll do it on the rotate so you can see it, you can use the scroll wheel to change the values. So it's kind of like a virtual slider. So wherever your cursor is, it'll adjust that number. So it's on the left side of this one, so as I click and drag up, it'll go 1 digit at a time. If I go to this one, it'll go to that number 1 digit at a time. If I go here, it'll go that number 1 at a time. So it's really neat how this works, because other softwares don't have something like that. Same thing here. If I go to this and I click and drag, you'll see how I'm able to adjust that. Okay, so now we'll see what this looks like. It should kind of go past her hand now. There it is. Now that looks pretty stupid. Let's just go back to the dope sheet. I'm going to grab these keyframes and just scoot them over a little bit. The speed of her hand and the speed at which she let go didn't really match. There we go. That's a little bit better. I'm also going to go to the curve editor and grab this keyframe. And from interpolation, I'm going to say horizontal. And what that does is just ease out of that motion. So let's see if that did anything. Yeah, that was fine. Okay, and you could really get into just so you're aware, their curve editor is pretty difficult to like zoom in and out of. It's not like the other softwares. It's really weird. But you could really get into this, and I could actually go through and professionally, production-wise, I would go through and clean this entire curve graph up so that the animation was smooth. So even if her hand was like, all over the place, I can create a nice smooth motion of her hand moving straight across there. Because things like this little hiccup here are kind of annoying to have. There we go. That looks smoother already, just getting rid of that one keyframe. Let's see if there's any other here. No? Yep, that's good. Okay, so even though we've tracked it, we can still add additional animation at the end of it if we want to have it kind of go a little bit further and be a little bit more interactive with what she's doing. Okay, so that's the process. So you're just going to keep doing that to all of the footage for this one, one right after the other. Way over here, where is it at? There it is. This one I've done, I went the other way. Instead of going across, I went down. So here's the original piece of footage here. I kept my tracker off to the side by itself. I just like to do that. And then here's my track, here's my merge. Here's my stuff, there's my merge. Here's my stuff, oops, there's my merge, okay? Now I'm using the same green constant for all of these. It doesn't matter. I can link to the same item. I can make a new one for each one. It does not matter. That's why this one's different, because that one is where I started to show where stuff can go together. Okay. So in this one, I don't know what she's looking at. There's nothing there. I should just skip ahead to where she actually does it. It's like here. So there's the one that she just slid across that we just adjusted. The next one is going to be this like 2-panel, I believe. So I still have to tweak the keyframes because I don't like how that's like shaking as she's like moving it. And then she's grabbing this file folder and sliding it over. And it just so happens like she obviously, she can't see with this. As she's moving the next couple files in, they actually land like right in the same spot. So it looked like she was like putting files in a folder, so that's what I'm going with. I could have also made like a trash can and her like recycling files, important government documents. I'll just skip here. There you go. Here's where she starts wiping, and you'll see it goes right on top of the file folder. And then I'll change that icon so that it's a file folder with actual files in it next time. Okay, but the first step is just to get the track down. Once you have the track down, everything is moving, then the rest of it is easy. Like, what do we want there? Do we want an animation? Do we want a blip? Do we want a graphic to pop in? And it's just a matter of changing that item here of what we want. If it makes it easier, whenever you have your merges here, if all the merges are set to a mix of 1, it's sometimes difficult to see when everything's stacked on top in full color. So I put all my merges to half mix so that they're transparent. So I can actually see like through the things so that I can see all the stuff. Okay. Now this is just like the After Effects one. This is kind of the doorway to the rest of the tracking stuff. This tracker, we're not done with it yet. There's a lot more we can do with it and a lot more we will do with it. But for now, we're sticking to the basics, and then we'll get more into what this can do. All right, questions?